They martyred my husband before my eyes. They severed my son's leg. I tied it with my scarf and carried him in my arms for 4 kilometers, but he too passed away. I did everything I could. Even my scarf served the purpose. But the Arabs of the region did not help us as much as the blood-soaked scarf on my head. In the rubble of Gaza, silence fell. In her arms, a mother's love and a black scarf soaked in blood. This is the story of a woman who did everything she could, even using her scarf to bind her son's severed leg. But despite her efforts, he too was lost. She sat there, unmoving, cradling what was left of her world. The air was thick with dust. So fine it clung to her lashes. So silent it muffled her own heartbeat. Smoke curled through the broken beams above, while the scent of ash and gunpowder hung in her throat like grief. She remembered the way his hand used to slip into hers, the way he'd laugh when the pigeons flew overhead. Now, only stillness, no warmth, just the weight of him in her lap, growing colder by the second. And her scarf, once a symbol of culture, of resistance, now bore witness to loss. But she didn't scream. She whispered a prayer, not to be heard, but to remind herself she was still alive. Because even in a place where everything can be taken, a mother's love refuses to die quietly. This mother name unknown became a symbol of sacrifice and despair. She survived the initial strike that claimed her husband. Her world shattered in an instant. Yet her maternal instinct took over. Her scarf, once a symbol of identity and resistance, became a makeshift tourniquet. She pressed it against her son's severed leg with trembling hands, whispering prayers she could barely remember through the roar of grief. The dust clung to her lashes like tears that refused to fall, and the scent of smoke mixed with blood filled her lungs. She did not cry. She could not. There was no time, only breath, only heartbeat, only him. Around her, the world blurred, splintered glass, twisted steel, a child's doll half buried in rubble. But all she saw was her boy's face, ashen, eyes wide with pain and confusion. "I'm here," she kept whispering, over and over like a spell to keep death away. "I'm here, Habibi. I'm here." And even when the silence fell, even when the ambulance never came, she held him close, wrapped in the last piece of fabric she could offer. A mother, holding on not to hope, but to love itself, until the very end. She tied the severed limb with her scarf, hoping to staunch the bleeding. She carried him step by agonizing step, for 4 kilometers through debris and dust. In her arms, the weight of love and helplessness. Each step felt like walking through fire. Her bare feet bled on shattered glass, but she didn't notice. Couldn't afford to. Her mind was a storm, fear screaming louder than the sirens above. "Just hold on," she begged silently. "Just one more breath, my son. One more breath." The sky above was choked with smoke, black, bitter, and endless. The smell of concrete and blood clung to her like a second skin. Around her, the city moaned, walls weeping, buildings bent like broken prayers. She passed a fallen bicycle, a child's shoe, small things that used to mean ordinary life. Now, all that mattered was the warmth in her arms and keeping it from fading. She didn't cry. Not yet. Grief would come later, if there was a later. For now, she walked. Because that's what mothers do, even when the road is rubble, even when hope is bleeding out. She walks, for him, yet no amount of courage could overcome the wounds he'd taken. Her son, her world, slipped away in her arms. She kissed his forehead, her blood and tears mingling with the dirt, and her scarf fell heavy with meaning. The silence that followed was louder than any explosion. She sat still, cradling him, rocking gently as if time might reverse. The world around her faded, just smoke and ruin. But in her arms, he was still warm. "Maybe he's only sleeping," her heart whispered, a fragile lie echoing through the hollow of her chest. The ground was littered with pieces of other lives, a burned photograph, a toy missing an eye, a Quran page fluttering beneath the ash. She smelled gunpowder and death, and something else, the shampoo he used last night. How strange, she thought, the scent of innocence could survive so much fire. Her scarf, now stained with his blood, no longer wrapped around his wound, but around her soul. A banner of love, of loss, of a mother who gave everything and stayed behind, not to scream, but to remember. Because sometimes survival isn't living. Sometimes it's carrying a name. When the voice that once spoke it is gone. That black scarf, a Palestinian keffiyeh, stood for resistance, history, identity. Now it spoke in a different tongue, a mute cry for help where no one answered. The Arabs of the region did not help us, she said, as much as the blood-soaked scarf on my head. It clung to her like a witness, bearing the weight of 1,000 shattered promises. The threads once woven with pride, now heavy with ash, sweat, and the memory of a boy who didn't make it. She remembered tying it before the airstrike, absently, automatically, never imagining it would bind his wound, never knowing it would absorb his last breath. Around her, prayers rose from cracked minarets, but no one came. The dust settled like snow over broken homes, and still she stood, alone in the aftermath, with only her scarf to mourn beside her. She didn't scream. Her silence thundered louder than missiles. That keffiyeh became her voice, a flag of grief wrapped tight around her skull, a declaration not of defeat, but of endurance. If the world won't see us, she thought, then let them see this. A mother, a martyr, a memory that will not fade. When a mother's scarf speaks louder than cameras, we must listen, we must act. Because that scarf stained with blood and silence says what headlines won't. It tells of nights where no lights flicker but fire, of lullabies drowned by drones, of children buried nameless beneath rubble, while the world scrolls past. She didn't choose to be a symbol. She only wanted to be a mother, to braid her son's hair, to warm bread before school, to hold him close during thunderstorms, not airstrikes. Yet here she stands, in a city with no safe corner, holding out the only thing she has left, his story, her truth. So don't turn away. Don't let silence be louder than suffering. Share this story. Demand media coverage. Raise your voice for those who've lost theirs. Stand with Gazan families whose grief is ignored and whose love still burns through the smoke. Subscribe for more stories from Gaza, real lives, not just statistics. Their voices deserve to be heard, because behind every shattered wall is a name, a favorite song, a mother's dream. You won't see their birthdays trending or their last drawings shown on primetime screens, but they lived, they laughed, they mattered. And now you are the echo they need, not just to witness, but to carry them forward. When cameras go dark and headlines fade, what remains are the stories we choose to hold on to. The scarf that wrapped a wounded child, the lullaby that was never finished, the eyes that once searched the sky, not in wonder, but in fear. So don't let them disappear into silence. Click, share, speak, because to forget them is to lose a piece of our own humanity, and to remember is to resist the erasure. One voice can carry, yours can amplify. Subscribe, and never let the world say they were voiceless.